This is the brand new 2016 MacBook Pro 15-inch with a touch bar. Well, it's actually just the new 2016 15-inch MacBook Pro because there's no actual non-touch bar model of the 15-inch MacBook Pro. There's a non-touch bar model of the 13-inch MacBook Pro, which I actually covered in a separate video. So if you haven't seen that, it's a pretty interesting laptop, so definitely check it out. But now I've been using my personal 15-inch MacBook Pro 2016 for actually the past month, and I've been testing this for quite a while. So hey everyone, welcome to the Enough Tech. I'm Daniel, and welcome to my full in-depth review of the 2016 MacBook Pro Touch Bar. Enjoy. Now, just to clarify, this is not my 2016 MacBook Pro Touch Bar review, but my 2016 MacBook Pro Touch Bar review. So yeah, in this video, I'll be focusing in depth on only the touch bar functionality of the new MacBook Pro because there's quite a lot of things that I want to mention in terms of that touch bar. So I'll be covering in detail what the touch bar actually is, what it does, and also what it doesn't, and also if it's actually worth buying the new 2016 MacBook Pro just for that new touch bar functionality. So yeah, enjoy. So section number one, let's talk about what that new touch bar on the new 2016 MacBook Pros actually is. So by far, the most impressive feature of the new 2016 MacBook Pro redesign isn't the new design, so the thinner body or the new space gray color or the increased performance or even that new much better display, but it's actually this new touch bar. So the entire function keys F1, F2 and so on, they've all been replaced by this multi-touch OLED panel. And yes, this is a full multi-touch panel. So same as with the iPhones, the iPads, or even the MacBook Pro's touchpad, you can use up to 10 individual fingers simultaneously. Now, some of you might be wondering, how does this new touch bar actually feel? And I have to say, it actually feels pretty good. It doesn't actually feel like the iPhone's display, so it's not as grippy. Your fingers simply slide across it, so it's really similar to the feel of the MacBook Pro's trackpad. So if you have a MacBook Pro laying around, that's how the touch bar feels. It's really similar to the trackpad. The touch bar is also a matte display, so it's not glossy, so glare is definitely not going to be an issue here. And since it's a matte display and since it also has that trackpad-like texture, fingerprints or smudges, they won't be an issue either. Now, the touch bar is also a pretty high resolution display, so Apple is calling this a Retina display. It's definitely not as high resolution as the iPhone 7 or even the Apple Watch, both having a PPI of 326. I'm not exactly sure what a PPI on this touch bar actually is. However, if you look closely, you can definitely see the pixels. But that's only if you look at it really closely. From the average viewing distance, pixels are definitely not going to be a problem on the touch bar. And since this is an OLED display, it looks perfect at night, so only the pixels that are used are actually lit. The rest of the touch bar is completely black, so it looks really nice at night. However, there's no actual way to turn off the touch bar. So it will automatically turn itself off after a few minutes of not touching the touch bar or the keyboard or the trackpad. But yeah, there's no actual way of turning the touch bar off when you want to. Now on the right side of the touch bar, we have something really interesting. So this is the power button, but it's also a Touch ID fingerprint scanner. So yeah, we finally have Touch ID on the Mac. This means that you can simply log into your MacBook by simply using your fingerprint, and just like on the iPhones, it's covered by a sapphire crystal lens, so scratches are not going to be an issue. But by far, one of the coolest features that you can do with a Touch ID is this one. So if someone else also has an account on your MacBook, that person can simply hold his finger on the Touch ID and it will automatically switch users. And yeah, when you hold it, it will automatically switch you back to your account and so on. So this is really cool. Even though I do think that this feature would be more appropriate to a desktop computer such as an iMac rather than a laptop, which is usually only used by one person. And now with this Touch ID, you can also use Apple Pay and simply pay with Apple Pay by simply using your fingerprint. However, when it comes to unlocking your Mac using Touch ID, I personally haven't found this to be very useful since I do have an Apple Watch. So when I open the lid of my MacBook, my Apple Watch automatically unlocks the MacBook. So I don't really get to use my fingerprint scanner, so I don't really get to use Touch ID at all. So now that you know what a touch bar is, what does it actually do? So is it actually useful? Okay, so when you power on your new MacBook Pro, you'll immediately notice that all of your controls, so brightness and volume, they've actually been reassigned to this right panel, which is actually so much better than the previous one. And that's because you can now just hold and slide left or right to increase or decrease the volume, and you can do the same for the brightness. So it's much more precise and also much faster than before. And then you also have this tiny arrow here, which essentially revives the old control keys. So again, brightness, keyboard backlight, volume, launchpad, everything that you had before with the old MacBook Pros is here. Now, the main reason for Apple doing this really big change with the new MacBook Pros, so adding a touch bar, is because, well, not a lot of people actually use the function keys. So apps such as Xcode and Terminal, they do take full use of them. However, most users only use the brightness controls, volume controls, music playback controls, keyboard backlight adjustments, and all of those functions could be essentially remapped to digital controls, which is basically what Apple has done with the touch bar. And this is, at least in my opinion, a really good idea. So when you open an app that supports touch bar functionality, the entire empty area that we had before in the middle, that's actually replaced by custom controls for each individual app. So for example, in Safari, you get a view of all the tabs that you have opened, and in Pages, for example, you have bold, underline, text formatting options, and when you tap on some of the buttons, you actually get taken to a second menu, and from here you can change the font, you can change the color, and more. And a pretty cool thing about a touch bar is that you can actually customize the buttons in the touch bar quite a bit. So for example, in Finder, you can drag and drop different actions for the middle part of the touch bar, so basically the one that changes depending on the app that you're using. And then you can also customize the right side of the touch bar, so basically the one that's always there. So for example, I've added a do not disturb mode instead of Siri, but yeah, you can replace that with pretty much anything you want from this list. And in case you want to bring back the function keys, you can still do that. So simply hold the Fn key, and there you go, you now have the F1, F2, F3, and basically all the function keys are back. And if you go to settings, you can actually choose to see the function keys at all time, or you can choose to always have the old control bar back that you had on the previous MacBooks. And you can even give specific applications permissions so that they will always display the function keys every single time you open them. So I think this is really useful. So an OLED touch bar with app-specific controls sounds really good. And I'm guessing that now you have a pretty general idea of what a touch bar is and what a touch bar can do. Now, unfortunately, it's not perfect, so there's quite a lot of issues with a touch bar and quite a lot of things that a touch bar is missing and quite a lot of things that a touch bar cannot really do. So let's take a look at all of those things, what a touch bar doesn't currently do. So in terms of those in-app controls, even though they're really nice to have, some of them are straight out useless. So for example, in Pages, you have bold, you have italics, you have underline, and yeah, I mean, you can do that so much faster from the keyboard. And then in Final Cut Pro, you get this tool selection button, and when you press it, you get access to multiple tools. But then again, why would you need that when you can simply press B for blade, T for trim, and so on? And this is so much faster than scrolling through that list. Then in Safari, you have this button to simply open up a new tab, which again, you can do so much faster by simply pressing Command+T. And yeah, basically 80% of the controls that you get are useless because you can already do that from the keyboard much faster. In Final Cut Pro 10, however, there are a couple of controls for trimming and deleting one side of the clip. And this is in fact really useful because it basically merges two keyboard commands into just one. So I do want to see more commands like this one. Now, besides some really useless controls in most apps, another one of its major downsides of the touch bar is that you cannot actually customize the in-app buttons. So this only works in Safari and Finder, and that's pretty much it. So if you want to customize the controls in, for example, Final Cut or Pages or Notes or anything else, you cannot really do that. So you'll have to stick with what Apple has given you, which for me personally was just 1 to 2 useful controls, and that was pretty much it. And there's also a couple of more annoying things, such as you cannot have the keyboard backlight buttons on the right always on panel or the music controls there, which means that now if you want to skip to the next song or the previous song, you have to press the arrow and then press the forward or previous songs. So now you basically have to do one extra step for those functions. Now, a few more issues that I want to mention. I've actually had the touch bar freeze on me quite a number of times, so I literally couldn't adjust the brightness or the volume anymore. I couldn't do anything. Now, after about 30 seconds or so, the touch bar did unfreeze itself, so I didn't have to force restart my MacBook, but still, I wasn't expecting the touch bar to actually freeze. Also, it's quite a bit weird that Apple hasn't made the full display touchscreen, because especially when it comes to dragging items from the display onto the touch bar, I don't know, it feels really weird dragging them from a display using a mouse and then arranging them on the touch bar using your finger. So yeah, this is really weird. It feels inconsistent and weird. And also I do feel like the touch bar is just too small. I mean, yeah, it's basically the same size as the old function keys row. However, Apple could have made this a tiny bit larger, so at least the same size as the regular keys. Or at least in my opinion, they should have extended the entire touch bar until the very top of the computer. So they should have made all this area a touch bar. What do you guys think about this? I think this would have been an amazing idea. I'm not sure why they haven't done that. I mean, at the moment, the touch bar is so small that viewing those web pages in Safari, not even to mention photos in the Photos app, is almost impossible. Now, there are a couple of more inconsistencies with a touch bar that I want to mention. So for example, when it comes to the Touch ID to the fingerprint scanner, as I've said before, you can use it to unlock your Mac, which is pretty cool. And you can also use it when you want to install some apps. However, when it comes to installing apps, it doesn't actually work all the time. So for example, when I got my MacBook Pro, I manually installed all of my apps, and about 70% of them did allow me to use my fingerprint, but the remaining 30% actually told me to use my password. And yeah, this also applies to system preferences. In some places, you can use your fingerprint. However, in others, you have to type in your password. So I don't know, it feels really weird and really inconsistent. Now, something that Apple definitely needs to add in the future when it comes to the touch bar is actually a help menu. So there's no help menu, there's no description for the actual buttons on the touch bar. So for example, in Final Cut Pro, there is this button here, which I actually have no idea what it does. So I've looked online, I've looked through the Final Cut Pro manual, which is over 1,000 pages long, and I couldn't find anything about this button. It does look like two displays, however, it doesn't do anything when I have my secondary display connected. So let me know in the comments if you have any idea what this does. So yeah, a help menu would be really useful, since this is just one of the many buttons that do not have a clear image, so to say, of what they do. Okay, so in the end, as a conclusion, what do I personally think about a touch bar? Is it actually worth getting a 2016 MacBook Pro just for this touch bar? So I've actually mentioned quite a lot of issues, quite a lot of bad sides about this touch bar, and when I got my MacBook Pro, after a few days of usage, I was like, okay, this is definitely a gimmick. And no, you shouldn't get the Touch Bar MacBook Pro just for that touch bar. However, since then, quite a few third-party apps have been updated for touch bar support, and the biggest update, the biggest change is actually Photoshop. So yeah, Photoshop now fully supports the touch bar on the MacBook. So honestly, the Photoshop touch bar support update alone simply makes the touch bar actually worth it. So this is such a big update, you can do so many things with a touch bar and Photoshop. So for example, just take a look at this. You now have a dedicated button for all of your undo history. So you can even get previews of all of your previous edits. And this is amazing. I mean, you could even do that before. This alone makes it worth it. And then you can also change the brush size. You can change the brush tip. You can change the color. You can also change something like the layer opacity. And you can even change the blending mode so quickly and so easily from this touch bar. So it seems that Adobe has indeed done an incredible job when it comes to adding touch bar functionality. They even added some unique controls that before were basically buried into the menus, or things that you couldn't even do before, such as the visual undo history. But Apple, on the other hand, they only added some basic controls like bold, italics, back in Safari. I mean, why would you have a back button in Safari when you can simply slide with 2 fingers on the trackpad and go back? So Apple's apps definitely need a useful touch bar update for the touch bar to be actually useful. Now, one exception when it comes to touch bar functionality for the Apple apps would actually be QuickTime. So in QuickTime, you can actually see the audio waves of a recording, which for me personally is really useful. So I can actually see my recording for this video right in the touch bar. So having said all this, especially with Photoshop, is it actually worth getting the Touch Bar MacBook Pro just for that touch bar? And I would say yes if you use Photoshop a lot, because Photoshop, in the end, Photoshop takes the most advantage of the touch bar. Apart from Photoshop and a few more third-party apps that do take full advantage of the touch bar, there's not much use to it. Now keep in mind that as time passes, more and more apps will be updated for touch bar functionality, and hopefully even Apple apps as well, because yeah, at the moment Apple doesn't offer that much functionality on their own apps. So hopefully they'll be updated as well with more useful controls, and hopefully soon we'll be able to customize all the controls in every single app, because at the moment, as I said before, you can only do this in Safari and Finder. Now there's also a bit of a learning curve when it comes to using the touch bar that I haven't mentioned before. So basically you'll have to look at a touch bar quite often if you want to see the controls, because you won't be feeling them, because there's no actual tactile feedback on the touch bar. So yeah, if you use like a monitor for the new MacBook Pro, you'll have to constantly look down and see what the buttons on the touch bar actually are and what they do. So in my opinion, don't buy the new MacBook Pros just for the touch bar functionality unless you're a heavy Photoshop user. So just wait until October or September 2017 until we get the new MacBook Pro models that are also going to be cheaper and much more powerful than those models, or even wait until next year 2018, because those models, especially when it comes to the touch bar, a lot more apps would be using the touch bar at that time. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you have any questions for me regarding the touch bar on the new MacBook Pros. You can also ask those questions on Twitter at ZonofTech. I'll have my full review of the 2016 15-inch MacBook Pro in a few weeks, so definitely stay tuned for that. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see that as soon as it comes out. Also feel free to give this video a like if you have enjoyed it, to let me know. And also, don't forget to enable notifications on my channel on both desktop and mobile by simply clicking that bell icon next to my channel. There's quite a lot of issues with the subscription feeds, so if you enable notifications, you'll be notified as soon as I upload the new Epic video. Also, let me know in the comments if you were epic enough to make it to the end of this video, and what do you guys think about the touch bar, honestly? Do you think it's useful at the moment? Do you think it's a gimmick? What do you guys think about the touch bar? Other than that, this was pretty much it for this video, so thank you all for watching this video. I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in my next one. ZonofTech, signing out. Cheers.